It's hot. It's hot. And you know, my first task this afternoon is yet again at another People's Assembly to salute the courage and commitment of those who have agreed to come on this platform. They are Barbadians first. And in that context, Ms. P, I say thank you. And let us be fair. In inviting her, I said, you do not always agree with everything that we do. You do not always agree with everything that the government does. That you have carved out for yourself an independent space, but you have exhibited the courage to speak to it on radio in a way where people identify you and not under the cloak of anonymity. And I believe that this country must always have a place for Barbadians who choose not to want to be a member of any political party, but who feel that they have a valid contribution to make. Just about 10 months ago, when we met in our 75th anniversary church service, starting the year of celebrations, this didn't happen by accident. I issued a call to arms to this party for those of you who attended that church service. And I want to recommend to you that you reread that call to arms. Because if you read it and internalized it, nothing that has happened in the last 10 months will take you by surprise. I spoke last Sunday at St. George, and I told you that this party will remain faithful to its philosophical moorings. That we must always protect those who can least protect themselves. That we must always create a platform for Barbadians to become the best that they can be, recognizing, as George said just now, that unity does not necessarily reflect symmetry of position or purpose or capacity, but that our role is to create a space for those of us who are born here, descended from here, or choose to be of here. Because unlike Frondel Stewart, I will not talk about strangers within the gate, Miss B. Because those who choose to be here for 1 year, 10 years, 20, 30, or 40, if we continue to treat them as strangers within the gate, then it reflects the kind of sectarian politics of which George just spoke. When you turn upon yourself and start to eat your own population, that is when you are seriously in danger. I want to thank Ryan Strawn, a brave Barbadian economist of class. I never knew Ryan Strawn before a year ago. I never met Ryan Strawn last election. And I remember on the eve of the election receiving an email with some graphs in orange and black, setting out better than anybody else had set it out, in my view, as to what had happened in this country in respect of the lack of fiscal discipline. That a country that understood that it had to be fiscally disciplined between 1955 and 2008 ran a deficit, current account fiscal deficit, 5 times in 53 years. And all of a sudden, could run it every single year since 2008, such that what was an aberration of conduct became now the norm of behavior, hence the position that we were in today. And he could have kept quiet. He is an entrepreneur with his own business in a small society where people are frightened to step out of their crease because of the fear. There are large private sector players in this country who will whisper to me and members of this party in the middle of the night, in the middle of the morning, will text, know that the situation cannot continue. But they are frightened for their contracts and payments and hence keep their voices down. Excuse me. If you ask, and you did a poll in this country tonight, and you asked every Barbadian, across the private sector, across the church, across the union movement, those who do not have a particular interest to serve, is Barbados on the right track? They will tell you no. If you ask them, do you believe that those who put us here can take us out? They will tell you no. They might have said yes a year or 2 or 3 ago. But they have now had 6 straight years of failure. They now have evidence of 4 failed plans. They now have evidence of ministers contradicting themselves on a daily basis. And as if the lack of confidence in the government was not enough, as Ryan told you, they now have evidence of the flip-flops of the governor of the central bank in terms of prescriptions and the continued printing of money, given the government the money it needs while the government doesn't cut expenditure, but yet telling everybody it needs to cut it. It is like the doctor giving the alcohol to drink while telling everybody they must stop drinking. So that I salute Ryan, because he has stepped out of the temple of his familiar, like many others who have come on this platform in the last 2.5 weeks. And then there is George Bell. A true case of wine getting better with age. You know, my memories of George, and he wouldn't know this, go back to when I was a young girl and a young teenager because of the exposure to my uncle, Elton. I call him Elton, others call him Ilombe. And hence, there was always a side of Barbados to which I was exposed that, in spite of people's attacks, in spite of people's ignoring them, a cadre of Barbadians remained faithful to a philosophy and a perspective of how society and civilization should develop. And George Bell is one of those authentic voices. That he added to it through a stellar career at the university and regionally working with the Barbados Labour Party government, yes, in CARICOM, not for domestic policy, but for regional integration, caused a Democratic Labour Party government to typify him as a BLP supporter in circumstances where his voice is an independent voice too, because it is too easy for them to point the finger when there's a disagreement with a view. That must stop in this country. People must be able to take a lash, a criticism, and understand that it is given in the spirit in which it is given, and even where it is not given in a good spirit, recognize, leave that ball outside the off stump and stay focused on the people's business. There is too much ego in politics today. And it has to be put one side because the country does not have the luxury of the distraction. And that is why today, when invited to participate in brass tacks, the Labour Party, through our General Secretary. We met and discussed. And we felt that in the very week when 3,000, 2,500, 4,000, God knows what the number is, when thousands of Barbadian families before next Sunday are due to be put on the breadline, it cannot be the business of the Barbados Labour Party to go and do political sparring on a call-in program. And I don't mind what people say. I know what our duty is. And our duty is to the people of this country and to those workers who are going home on Friday or whenever. How can political sparring help a family where the mother working at National Housing from St. Philip in good conscience takes a job from Michael Ashley or whoever he sends to give her a job, goes down to National Housing, glad to be there, don't even have a table to sit down at because nobody knows she's coming. Receives a salary for the last year or two, thank God for her. Goes and makes commitments pursuant to the fact that she's working. May all courts or the credit union may have agreed to send money to a mother who ailing overseas, have now to face a 40% increase in prices in the last few years, a light bill that continues to balloon, and now faces yet another week of uncertainty as to whether her name will be on a list. Just because she felt that she could depend on the word of a minister that the entity to which he was sending her would have the money to pay her, as is your natural expectation when anybody send you for a job somewhere. He didn't send her to volunteer. He sent her to work. And we have reached the stage in this country where in the second decade of the 21st century, we have to say to people, politicians, including ours in the Labour Party, the Dems, everyone, stop using the people of this country as a political scaffold. It is wrong. And we have educated people. Look at what that says at the back of this room. Literacy. Read and understand. It doesn't tell you read alone. It tells you read and understand. And you know why I am so impressed with this meeting this evening? Because I have thanked the guests. But I haven't thanked the members of the Labour Party who spoke here yet. Lynette Eastman, as usual, gave a brilliant speech. And she didn't say anything out of character. She said what you have heard her say every year since she has entered public life. That we must depend on ourselves, that we must rise to the occasion. That you must open your eyes. You heard the president of the Young Socialists, Akil, and I give them a hard time sometimes too. He will tell you. But he is a fine young man and a fine speaker. And all I ask of him is, do not fall into the trap of the people of the Democratic Labour Party where speaking is everything. Because a brand is only as credible as it is real. And if you cannot speak to the people on truth, and if you cannot speak truth to power, and if you cannot prepare yourself with a level of substance such that your message is credible, then say nothing. You have nothing to prove about how brilliant a speaker you are because people know that. What matters now? You know, I tell people that I get frightened when you can speak well. Because not only does the gift of gab frighten women, not only does the gift of gab frighten people generally. I've been practicing law now 25 years, going in 26. I have never known a con man to be a bad speaker or unpleasant. But if he unpleasant, and if he can't speak well, he can't con you. And therefore, the simple message, my brother, is that substance matters. Content matters. Chris Sinclair can speak well, but he has shown you that it is as easy for him to say one thing as it is to say the next and to change plans in mid-motion. All of them. Donville's same thing. Donville's problem can be summarized in one sentence. Frondell Stewart today named the eminent members of his cabinet and left out Donville. He left him out. Cease and settle. And from this platform tonight, you also heard Indar Weir. And I asked Indar yesterday, not just to speak, but to cheer. Because Indar, more than any other candidate last election, was subject to a culture of populism that blinded people. A culture of populism that blinded people. And I am in a sharing mood tonight. You know, I have a large majority. I represent an urban constituency. My constituency was not won when the Labour Party recorded its worst defeat. 1986. It was Christchurch West, St. Thomas, St. Peter. It can by no measurement be considered as a Barbados Labour Party stronghold. It really isn't. And I, Indar, have had to humble myself from 1989 and then with the defeat in 1991 and work with the people. Not just for them, but with them. And I start from the simple premise that every election I have zero. I have never opened a ballot box yet, Grantley, and seen a vote in it. I start with zero. But you cannot convert people to have trust in you without working with them. And I believe that if you work with the people, and I say so with all sincerity, with the people in this parish, because I don't believe in constituencies where parishes are divided. I believe you work with the parish. I don't only deal with St. Michael Northeast, I deal with St. Michael. And that is because last week I talked about the fluidity of relationships. It's about the fluidity of relationships in a parish. You sleep one way, you eat meals one place, you collect mail one place. That's how Bajans live. They're not compartmentalized into constituencies. But I believe that enough people have been disappointed by Michael Lashley's behavior and word, have been let down, have been exposed, and begin to understand for themselves that he is a fair weather friend. And that he will only be there to the extent that it is to gain him access to votes in an election. But that at the end of the day, will he be the one to see that he can transform lives in this parish for families in this parish? And yes, We live in an age where people want to know what's in it for me. But this experience is going to cause a lot of people to return to the basics of life. It's not about a quick dollar. And in my constituency, I say it publicly, I say it for everyone, I have never paid for a vote on election day. I will never do it. There are workers who work. And the fellas, the few that are young and now come up and who may try to come and ask, as 10 or 15 of them came election day to me, I use language that I cannot use in a schoolroom, and certainly not on a Sunday night. But the essence of what I said to them is, I am with you 365, 24/7. No amount of money on an election day can substitute 365, 24/7. 365, 24/7. 365 days a year. 7 days a week. 24 hours a day. And that is all that you need to offer the people, because I'm telling you that that is worth more than Michael Ashley has offered them in the last 2 election terms. But I want also to salute you for the quality of your speech, because I have seen you mature, and I've seen a level of reading that now places you on the level of Lynette and the others who have served in cabinet. And I believe that the quality of this platform this evening is of a standard that I regret the smallness of the size of the room. That I regret that we could not stream because of no internet access. But it is of such a quality that we will do everything to share it on the internet when it becomes available tomorrow, because all of Barbados must hear these individual speeches here tonight. And you know, I'm in this mood, and I don't want to talk too much longer or too long, because I want you to have the right to ask questions like everywhere else. But I'm in this mood tonight because there is a sense, and it's not just about the economy, it's about every aspect of this society. And I want to offer my prayers to those persons who were injured in the ZR accident this evening in St. Peter, in Gibbs. I understand 17 people were injured. I don't know the facts. But these things are happening too regularly. And I don't know if, as Sir Roy says, it is because of stress or recklessness, but we need to stop and pause and understand what we are facing. I want to offer my prayers too for that young boy, Kimar Franklin, who was hit in his head at a school. His mother sent him to school. His mother next visited him in the hospital. His legs cannot move. He is incontinent. And you know why I can speak about Kimar? Because he's my godson. His father, God bless his soul, was a man called James Franklin, who worked at the West Indies Rum Refinery. His mother, Harriet, raises him on her own. And something has to be wrong in a society where people now can feel that there is just such a cavalier approach to resolving conflict. And there are others too, you know, in the last year or two I can tell you about. And the empty nonsense that comes out of the Democratic Labour Party about building a society, when in truth and in fact we are seeing the disintegration of a society, is what angers me tonight. That you cannot suddenly separate the development of human beings without understanding that also it takes cash to care, that the beauty of economic development, and Clyde wrote about it on Thursday, quoting Sir Arthur Lewis. It's not only that you have growth and prosperity, it is about the human agency of choice. Amartya Sen wrote about it. What does it matter? What does emancipation mean if you do not have choice? What does it mean if you don't have the freedom to determine your ways? That is why the Located Labourers Act, coming after emancipation, represented the most iniquitous piece of legislation to enforce forced labor in this country. And they could get away with it because of the limited land size and the inability to really have a peasantry develop, a peasant class develop, because there was not the land. And if you wanted to be able to live on that plantation, you had to sell your labor to the plantation owner for 100 years after slavery. This is what we have been fighting for 75 years against this. It isn't only to make things sound pretty and to give people all these things. That's what Grantley Adams fought about. To give people choice. And when you remove from a society the ability from individuals to make choices about their own life, it is a form of oppression. We didn't get where we wanted to carry you when we left government in 2008. We're the first to admit it. And the journey is still continuing. And in Britain's Hill last election, I gave a speech about enfranchisement. And I said to you that we have a date with destiny to complete before the century of enfranchisement from 1937 to 2037. We've seen different stages of enfranchisement. I may not be there in 2037, but those of you like Nathan and other youngsters in here have to continue the journey in the same way that I was not there with Grantley. Each of us has a role to play. In 1937, it was about people being able to assemble and to organize themselves politically. And you had a form of political enfranchisement. You then had a form of workers' enfranchisement, with the workers' union being formed and people being able to organize. And that is what George was talking about tonight, about the loss of their core mission, about the understanding of solidarity. Good Steel Pulse song on it too. You then had the enfranchisement of the vote. That all of a sudden you didn't have to own a piece of land to be able to cast your vote in this country. And that once you were over 21 and thereafter over 18, that you could choose who could stand and act in your name and who could be your voice. And that you could review it periodically, hence the right to vote. And then you had the beginning of what I call social enfranchisement. That people should be able to go to school, not just to 7th standard, but to secondary schools, West St. Joseph, Parkinson, St. Leonard's, built because no matter how much you wanted to say, as Grantley and the others wanted to say that you should go to school, you had to have schoolrooms. You had to have schools. So you had to build capacity first. They were not a government of pronouncement like this government that pronounces something and then don't make it happen. He did it the other way. He built capacity first. And when he went to the federal parliament and the Labour Party lost, the easiest thing for Mr. Barr to do was to sign and say, let there be free education because there were school places. You think you could just get up one morning and say that if you hadn't built those 3 secondary schools, Princess Margaret as well, 4? People in St. Philip would never have had a chance. There are people like Trevor Clark, ends up as an ambassador to Geneva, the World Trade Organization, where he went to school, in it. Princess Margaret School, even David Eswick. And if people can reach the very highest level of achievement in this country, how can we continue with the nonsense of discrimination in terms of what quality of schools we have in this country? But you had social enfranchisement too, with the hospital being built. And then in the 60s, there was the sensitivity to the need for social security, enfranchisement of workers in terms of their future ability to take care of themselves once they retired, once they were injured, ultimately once they were on maternity leave, once they went unemployment benefit Tom added in 1982, 81, 82. So that the process of enfranchisement continued with respect to social security benefits. And the process of enfranchisement started gingerly, fair is fair. Mr. Barr passed the Tenantries Development Act. The Labour Party carried it really to its halcyon level when Tom amended the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act to allow people now to get into economic enfranchisement such that tens of thousands of families were now enfranchised and can still, to this day in 2014, buy a piece of land at 5,000 square feet for more than you can buy a pair of sneakers in Bridgetown. For less, than you can buy a pair of sneakers in Bridgetown. $500, because 10 cents a square foot is what? And Tom continued it with incentives to the credit unions, to the point that Barbadians now have over $2 billion or almost $2 billion in the credit union movement. So that when we say that the government is broke and the country isn't broke, it is because the country has savings in the credit union movement and in the banking sector. But they cannot lend the government any more money without breaching the prudential standards under which they operate. And when people tell me that this is not a country of shareholders, I ask them what you're talking about. If a country has more than 100,000 people in the credit union movement, thank God for the tax incentives set in the 70s by Tom Adams. That is more than half of our adult population as shareholders in this country. Tell me that you want them to learn a little better how to use that shareholding to invest in other private companies or bonds or whatever. But that is why the credit union movement, in my view, needs a unit trust corporation to be able to invest those savings prudentially on behalf of the 100,000 people who got savings in it so they get the best return on their money. And Owen Arthur continued it with the Urban Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act, with the enfranchisement to be able to create a fair economy and a new economy with the Fair Trading Commission. Because if you are unequally yoked, enfranchisement cannot flourish. Our mission still remains at hand. And I say to you tonight that we have a government that is so rooted in a historic past. We have a historic relic for a prime minister who does not appreciate that if the government is broke, that the persons he needs to turn to are the people of the country, Barbadians, to help the government make the adjustment out. But it is taboo conversation to discuss anything around him. It is taboo for us to say that anybody else has a solution. And if you doubted it before, he made it clear and bare for all to see today on the front page of the paper. Because he believes that at the very time when he and his government are about to send home thousands of workers, that the only repository of knowledge, of wisdom, is the 16 people elected to government and Patrick Todd and Esteban Suku. That nobody else in this country has that knowledge. And he goes to a lecture this weekend. He doesn't go to clarify the confusion between Esteban Suku, who says less than 3,000, and Sinclair, who says Friday more than or 3,000. He appoints both of them but is prepared for them to conflict each other. And he himself, what makes it even all the more laughable, is that he himself contradicts himself. Because he said earlier in January, and let me quote him, "We do not want to get preoccupied with calling numbers like 3,000 and 5,000 and whatever amount of 5,000s. What we are concerned with is the budgetary impact of the measures which we have to take, and our primary objective is achieving the budgetary objective. Therefore, the government will do what it has to do to achieve those objectives, because when those objectives are achieved, all will benefit from the long run." I say to you tonight that the Prime Minister of Barbados had a duty last night, has a duty tonight and tomorrow morning to let the country know the specific plan that the government has in respect of how many public servants will go home by the end of this week. I'm not talking about next week, you know. I am talking about this week in the year of our Lord. And what makes it more repugnant is that you are going to give somebody a piece of paper Friday afternoon and tell them don't come work Monday. Isn't that what Grantley Adams fought against in the 1950s? The right to have the decency of notice. And you can't tell me that Chris Sinclair told us on the 13th of December, because I thought Chris Sinclair was talking about Peter Jilks. I thought Chris Sinclair was the man that ran against Dale, Dennis Holder. I thought Chris Sinclair was talking about Pat Innes, who ran against me. I can list off all the political consultants. You can't say that it is acceptable to give somebody a letter Friday and to go home Monday. And if it happened under our time, it was wrong. If it happened under any other government's time, it is wrong. And I say to you, it is against normal, decent standards that you would associate with good industrial practice. You understand why people got stressed? Anybody working at National Housing, at National Conservation, at MTW, at school meals, even at the hospital. And we now know that it's going to take $16 million a month to run the hospital, which is $192 million a year. But the government votes 146 because it wants the deficit to come in low to fool somebody. When your first responsibility is law and order, and then health, and then education. Mr. Stewart did not use last night or Friday, whenever he did the address, to tell us about government's deficit and why we continue not to be told the truth and why the central bank puts blanks, Ryan, in table 1. You quote table 4, but you can quote table 1 because he give you blanks. And when we fill the blanks in the last press conference in September, the first blank told us that government's deficit at the end of September was 10.8%, double digit. I could only ask the question if that is why there was a blank when the number was available to the central bank and not published. And I say to the governor, what is the number today? Because you can't tell us you have figures for table 4 and can't calculate the deficit and the current account deficit for table 1. And you should not be putting Mr. Strawn and others to do the mathematics when you have the information available, unless you are frightened to share it. I say to you as well that the Prime Minister should have been talking to us, because you know his speech last night will be remembered more for what he did not say than what he said. Why has his government relied on the central bank to provide 50% of government's financing for its deficit, and the National Insurance Scheme the other 25%? Why is he not talking to us about his concern as to why nobody wants to lend the government of Barbados money to pay its bills? And deficit is a fancy word for one thing, that when the time comes at the end of the month for me to pay salaries, for me to pay bills, I don't have the money, so I got to borrow it from somebody to pay. And if nobody will lend it to me, I'm in trouble and can't pay. And if nobody will lend it to me, the one thing that the government has been doing is to print money through the central bank to buy government securities as if that money can help us purchase goods and services from overseas with foreign exchange. That is why the reserves are dropping. That is why since the Credit Suisse loan, which came in at the end of December, that the reserves have dropped almost 60 million again. And we are not even finished with the month of January. And you know, I say to you tonight, comrades, friends, when you have borrowed on those draconian terms, and there is still leakage and seeping at the rate at which it is coming, in the very month of the year when you are supposed to be doing your best in terms of the collection of reserves, that should tell every Barbadian that we are in deep crisis in this country. He should have shared with us what he intends to do by calling the governor of the central bank and asking the governor, but tell me something, governor. In June, on the 27th, you told a consultation we needed a $429 million adjustment in 8 months. By August, the Minister of Finance, having consulted with you, told the country that he was going to do under 400 million in 19 months, of which only 88 million would be a cut in expenditure between August last year and March this year. But then, by December, you told the ministry, and I can only say what I hear, and if I am wrong, correct me, of finance, that you wanted 5,000 to 5,500 jobs cut. But the minister came and announced 3,000. Every few months, the government changes its tune, but the governor's prescription also changes. And if the problem is what you said it was, and if in September you told the country that the revenue was performing worse than you thought it would earlier in the year, what are the implications for Barbados' reserves and Barbados' stability? Cut out the talk about anything else. The governor must answer to the country. And he must also tell the country whether he has advised the Ministry of Finance formally under the law as is required by the Central Bank Act that Barbados' monetary stability is threatened. When your reserves can drop $600 million from the 1st of April to the middle of December, you boost it by 300 at the end of December, and 60 million drop again. That was a 40% decline. If I lost 40% of my body weight in 6 months, you would wonder something wrong with me if I got cancer or something. It was too steep a drop in too short a time. And when I say to this country, the truth must be told, if the people of Barbados are told the truth, and if the people of Barbados, having been told the truth, are content to remain on this path, the Barbados Labour Party will sit back and accept the will of the people. But until such time as the truth is told, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, the Barbados Labour Party will mount its platform and mount its people's assemblies. And until such time, we will continue to say that it is our view that this government is incompetent. And no amount of denial from the Prime Minister, and no amount of dubbing a few eminent. He does not want a domestic eminent persons group. So be it. His political manhood has shut out all other views and recommendations because he does not want to deal with the Barbados Labour Party or admit that he needs help. That's what you call a man frightened. His political manhood doesn't allow him to say, well, I really do need some help. And it wasn't us who talked about the Labour Party being at the table. The first person to say so was Sir Roy Trotman at the end of November when he said that the government ought to consult with the Labour Party, the Social Partnership, and everybody on the adjustment. You remember that? It was Trotman. Well, I said to the Prime Minister, if you don't want to deal with this woman, me, take care that before the end of the year you ain't going on bended knees to the other woman in Washington, D.C. And her name is Madame Lagarde. And she has already crossed swords, or she has already had a Barbadian man cross swords with her. So that our name is not the greatest up there. But if you feel that you don't want to deal with this woman, take care the other woman don't trap you. And I say to you that if we are to avoid the fate, Ryan spoke about it, Lynette, Indar, Akil, Miss P, George, we are on a path that is the most destructive path since independence. I am not a preacher of gloom and doom, but I am a person whose eyes are open, and I read and I understand. And everything that we have said to you from 2008 to 2009 to 2010 to 2011 to 2012 to 2013, you tell me whether it has happened or not. And if I say to you, after 6 straight years, as God is my witness, that we are on a path that is destructive, that we are on a path that will wreak havoc, that will decimate thousands of families in this country, I say so with all sincerity. And the others hear me say it, that if I have to be a living sacrifice to be able to bring the truth to Barbadians, then so be it. I will not be the first one in history. And if I have to assure those who don't come to these meetings, but who listen to the propaganda of the Labour Party preaching insurrection, we are doing what Errol Barrow allowed us to do when he passed the Constitution of Barbados. Speaking to the people. Assembling the people. There's no policeman out there. Why? Because we're doing nothing illegal. Cynthia? But trust me, and I want to give you this reason as to why not. And I'm going to repeat it every speech for the rest of the week or two, because too much is happening. I talked far longer than I wanted to. Barbados' only asset is stability. And you're going to hear me say it in every speech. Economic stability, political stability may not allow us to move at the pace at which we wanted to. Social stability, low crime. It allows us to demand a higher value for much of what we offer beyond what we should really get, given our size and given our capacity. Devaluation will decimate thousands of families. But devaluation is not the biggest threat to the state. The biggest threat to the state is the loss of stability. Because like virginity, when you lose it, you do not get it back. And devaluation is just the first avalanche. And we will start, because a doctor might tell you you have cancer of the lungs. You know it is serious, but you don't quite appreciate what the day-to-day life of cancer with the lungs at stage 4 really means. And we may have to express to you because you've never had cause to study the risk of these things. You never had it. And like a doctor will be questioned, you may want then to question those who can give you the answers. So that if a company imports a tin of corned beef, Mr. Clark, for what? You ain't working there no more, but you used to know. But they import it probably for just under $1 US. That dollar US is 2 Barbados dollars. If you then have to pay 3, 4, or 5 Barbados dollars for the same tin, your taxes, Lynette, are ad valorem, percentage based. So by the time you buy the corned beef at $5 this month, if the worst happens, you might be paying $8 or $9 for that same tin next month. The gasoline and diesel, you import it in US currency. If it takes more local currency, Ryan, to buy it, the price will go up the next month exponentially in the same way. The one thing that has not gone up is your salary or your pension. Your light bill, the fuel clause, same thing. Let us understand what is at stake. So that when I say to you that the Labour Party's mission is to preserve the stability of this country and to avoid the decimation of tens of thousands of Barbadians, we are not here, 2-3 times a week because we want, we are not here 2-3 times a week because we want to just make idle noise. We are not even here because the lure of government, there's nothing to be attracted to when this government leaves the mess. We are here out of a sense of duty because we understand that whatever happens, Barbadians must band together to stop the worst from happening in this country. Barbados must always come first with the Barbados Labour Party. And I end by telling you, thank you, that we no longer have the luxury of time. I told you in August, if this is the wrong-headed approach that the government and the minister wants to go down, let us wait and see. I told you in December, let us wait and see. Regrettably, I have to tell you, after Mr. Stewart's local eminent persons group rejection, let us wait and see if he will not have to go on bended knees to an international eminent persons group. And that international eminent persons group might otherwise be called the IMF. And I would only say to you in closing that if it walks like a duck, and if it quacks like a duck, and if it has feathers like a duck, it has to be. Good night.